There's no doubt that most of the art that we have today that depicts biblical characters like Moses and Jesus and even God himself is depicted as someone who's sitting on a throne. It's someone who has a long beard and it's someone who appears to be a white person. Now, most of these artists were drawing during the Renaissance. So people like Michelangelo, who would have drawn the Sistine Chapel that depicts God as a white person. But is God really a white person? Or was this people who were just reflecting God maybe on the basis of their culture and ethnicity? So this was a question that was raised in the cosmological argument channel, which is a channel that seeks to get people or Christians to be sure about their faith. And I quite appreciate what he does in challenging some of our pastors about the Bible, because I think a lot of the times our understanding of the Bible comes so much from experience, but really we do not wrestle with the weightier matters of Scripture. And that's why a lot of pastors go to that channel and they struggle. I mean, take a look at this pastor.
Mr. Tulankosi, your Bible in Psalm 51 verse 5 states that we all come into this world as sinners. Listen to me. Mary also inherited Adam's sin. Do you agree? Okay, here is it. A sinner gave birth to God. However, the same God punishes and condemns sinners to hell. What is all that?
And so this video that we're going to watch now is coming from a guy called Daniel. He was being interviewed and asked about why some of our pictures in Christianity depict God as a white person, but the devil as a black person. Now, I know most of our pictures of the devil are actually red. They're not actually of a black person. But nonetheless, let's explore this idea, because I think the issue of race and racial identity is an important one. And I think there's a lot of lessons that all of us can learn. And I think this video really opens up this discussion for all of us. So let's have a look at it.
Now, this Jesus on earth, was he an angel?
No.
Was he a white man, black man?
So if we look at the Middle East, Jesus must have been dark in complexion.
A dark-skinned person.
Dark skin, yes, in complexion. I'm not saying that he was African looking or white looking, but in the Middle East there is a dark complexion.
Okay. So you think he was a dark-skinned person?
I would think so, yes.
Why then, if you're saying that that he was a dark-skinned, you're the first person to say that to me. To say that Jesus was a dark-skinned person, and if he was a dark-skinned person, why now is he depicted as a white person? I mean, the pictures, paintings that we have in the whole world, with paintings of white angels, paintings of white Jesus, paintings of white God. Why is God depicted as a white person? And Jesus is white, and the angels is white, and the devil is a black person.
Yeah, so this is the reason why I think when God gave us the law, he said, do not have any idols. He said, do not make any images of anything, of the sea, of the heaven. And this is what so-called religious people always do, is they seem to make an idol for people to worship. So we shouldn't worship a picture, because unless you have actually seen Jesus in the spirit, we don't know what Jesus looks like. Okay. There was a little girl that painted a picture of Jesus, and people have said that's how Jesus looks. But at the end of the day, I don't know unless I've seen him.
Evangelist Daniel,
yes.
When I dream at night, when I dream Jesus, I dream a white Jesus. How can you help me?
So I think a lot of people have, overactive imaginations, but if Jesus came to visit you, you would know about it. But a lot of people have accounts and said, they haven't seen the face of Jesus. And the closest picture we've got is that picture that little girl painted. And it went viral, and a lot of people started to say, when I had the vision, I saw that Jesus.
Yeah. But
So there you have it, guys. The response from Daniel is that it's actually people who have tried to make God in their image. And it's very important for all of us to actually understand that in Christianity, you don't need an image of Jesus, because I'm not saved by Jesus's image. I'm not supposed to be praying to Jesus's image, but actually I am saved by his death and resurrection on the cross. And so he saves me irrespective of what I assume that he looked like when he was on earth. So we must also understand that when missionaries came to Africa, they came with an agenda that was trying to promote Western culture. So they weren't just trying to come and preach the gospel to people, but really they did have a colonial agenda. And this colonial agenda then allowed them to take the depictions of Jesus, maybe that would have emerged out of European culture, to then bring it to Africa and other parts of the world. And so this was another way of trying to show some form of racial superiority of white people over other races. But I think this is important for us to understand that in the Middle East, if you look at the oldest depictions or paintings of Jesus, whether they come from North Africa or Egypt or in the Middle East itself, most of those pictures actually depict Jesus as someone who is much more dark skinned, as someone who's dark skinned. And so it's important that we must know that this idea of a white Jesus is actually a very late development, coming really from Europe and in a much later stage. But the earliest pictures of Jesus are depicting someone who's dark skinned. But irrespective of what the pictures look like, the Bible actually doesn't even want us to be making images of Jesus, because really we're creating idols. Because we're told in the Bible that God is spirit. And if God is spirit, it means that God transcends color, right? Whenever I say I believe in Jesus, already I am affirming that I'm actually, as a spiritual person, believing in a spiritual being. And therefore, this has got nothing to do with black and white, but it has got to do with the spiritual reality that all of us must respond to. So all of those pictures was actually just humanity trying to make God in their own image. But God himself is actually not a physical being, because Jesus Christ actually, even though he came on earth and he died, he rose again, but he actually returned back to a spiritual state, even though he still has a human essence or a human nature, if you will, that is united with the divine nature, but it is a glorified body. In other words, he is in the supernatural, he's not in the physical. And so, therefore, God relates to us in the spiritual. And even when we read the Bible itself, you'll see in Revelation chapter 7 that when John looks up in heaven, he sees people who are worshiping God, and these people are coming from all races. They're coming from all cultures, and they're all worshiping the same God. And so it shows that really the Bible transcends the whole idea of culture, geography, black and white. It goes beyond all of those things and really calls all of humanity to actually be united under one God, one people under one God, praising him equally without any superiors. But I think it's also important that we also critique this idea of basically giving value to skin color. So, for an example, taking abstract concepts like good and evil or pure and evil, and then attributing them to color. I mean, black has no attributes. So, black can never be evil. Black can never be bad or good. I mean, it's just a color. White can never be pure either. And I think this problem is not just a Western problem of associating negative things with black. You know, you'll notice people will mention that the black sheep of the family is the one person who's the rebel of the family. Or when they say people, you are being blacklisted, right? Black is now seen as a negative thing. It's not just a Western thing, because even in our African culture, you know, when someone is cursed, we say "unes nyama," right? So there's this idea of associating evil with darkness or with blackness, if you will. And this is something that just comes natural, I think, sometimes because, for an example, if you look at night, night is the time that is dark. It's dark at night, but all the maybe the negative things are practiced in the evening. A lot of witchcraft is practiced in the evening. In fact, if you are visiting Isangoma, most of the time you can only visit them in the night. But this is a discussion for another day. And so, this idea of associating black and darkness with evil things is not just a white thing. And this is why it's important for all of us not to draw our identity from those sort of things. Those we can't draw our identity from blackness. We can't draw our identity even from being called African. Because what's really important is that when someone says, I am black, they're saying I'm black in relation maybe to someone who's white or someone who's colored or someone who's Indian, right? But in relation maybe to a Zulu person, I'm going to say I'm a Xhosa person. But maybe in relation to people who come outside of the Nguni clan, maybe I'll say I'm Nguni because maybe I'm not in the Sotho or Tswana sort of family tree. But at the same time, I can say I fall under the Bantu family tree, but maybe don't fall under the Berbers and some of the African tribes that are not Bantu tribes, right? The Khoi and the San are not Bantu tribes, and yet they are also African. So you see that you can actually be very narrow about this, but you can also be very expansive about it to say, well, I'm an African in relation to a European, but maybe in relation to a dog, I'm actually human. And maybe that's my real identity. Maybe that's our real identity, is that actually all of us are human. All of us are made in the image of God. And this is why our Christian identity, for me, being rooted in the fact that we're made in the image of God, it means that I'm a spiritual being. If God is spirit, then I am also spirit if I am made in God's image. But if I am spirit, it also means that my experience as maybe as a Xhosa person who lives in Africa is a temporal experience, because all of us come from God, who is spirit. All of us are spirit who are having a human experience. But all of us one day will die, and our spirit must go back to the one that gave us. So you can see that spirit is in actual fact the absolute, and the physical, the things that we like to define ourselves with, those are things that are just temporal. And I think even we can even push this further to say that we have a universal identity as human beings. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you come from Europe, it doesn't matter whether you come from Asia, it doesn't matter where you come from, right? All of us are human. And this is where the idea of African spirituality becomes very problematic, because people will say, we are spiritual. A spiritual is what we were born with. It's not something we learned. Religion is something we learned. And all of us will say, these are awesome things. We are spiritual beings. But straight away, when they define spirituality, then straight away, it's about Africa. It's about blackness. It's about Isintu, right? It automatically now isolates everyone else and say, no, we must practice our own spirituality. But how do we practice our own spirituality when all of us are human? When all of us have one spiritual identity? Because all these things of Africa, I mean, Africa, again, is something that is a colonial word. So how does a colonial Western word define people who live in this continent? But again, the ideas of blackness and whiteness speaks to our physical appearance. But your physical appearance and who you are in the inside is not always the same person. Because, I mean, even if we look at social media today, what people appear like in public is not always who they are inside. And so, really, when we're talking spirituality, when we're talking about being made in the image of God, it means, number one, I am spirit. But it also means, number two, that I have the ability to have a relationship with God, right? I have the ability to be creative because God is creative. Therefore, I reflect his creativity. And so when someone designs a car, it's a reflection of the image of God, reflection of this creative God. When I exercise my mind and I think, it's a reflection that there's a great mind that created and designed everything that is out there. And so, really, when we talk about the image of God, we're talking about something that transcends race, something that transcends color, something that transcends the continent, even the continent that we live in. It speaks to our spiritual essence that is much greater than our physical appearance, Our physical appearance is something that is temporal. And so Africa cannot define spirituality. Blackness cannot define spirituality. Isintu cannot define spirituality, because spirituality is something that is universal, because all of us are universally human beings made in the image of God. Therefore, we're equal. And this is why the idea of African spirituality, we can never actually critique racism. You can never critique people who make God to be made in their image, because, again, African spirituality makes God in their image and seeks to define the spiritual with the physical. It seeks to define the things that are supernatural, trying to define them, using Africa and the limitations that we have within Africanness and all those sort of things. That's why we can never say colonialism was wrong. To say when white people came to Africa and pushed a white agenda, what if that was just their culture? Right? If you're calling Africans to just practice their own spirituality and focus on their own culture, love their own, listen to their own, be guided by their own, then how can we say those people are wrong for doing what they did, if this is what we're also preaching? So African spirituality doesn't even have the tools to actually critique colonialism. Colonialism can only be critiqued by the idea that we're all equal. But how can you say we're all equal when actually you are saying we're all individual, that we have our own spirituality, that we have our own ways? What if their ways are just superior than our ways? What makes us equal? What makes us all human? What makes us equal and what makes us human is the fact that we've been made in the image of God. This is why dehumanizing someone is wrong. This is why making Jesus in your own image and showing it to other people and saying God is like me, because no, God is not like you, because God is actually different from all of us, but yet at the same time, all of us are made in his image. All of us have value. And that can only be rooted in this idea that we're all made in God's image. We're all equal. There's no superior. But the minute we say we have our own, that even though we're human, but we've got this sort of individualistic spirituality, then it actually opens up all these ideas of superiority and all these sort of things. And you'll hear people saying, what's powerful about Black people is their spirituality. Why is spirituality defined by Blackness? What is spirituality got to do with Blackness? What has it got to do with whiteness? I know a lot of people are doing this because they're responding to the whiteness that's been that's been pushed in their faces. And I think it's important for us to understand that spirituality is not a response to white supremacy, but spirituality is a response to God's supremacy. This is Bisrat for Africa, a channel dedicated to giving you Christian commentary on religious and spiritual matters. We'll see you guys on the next video.